Welcome
Hi.
today at Istanbul Aydın University Blockchain Talks of Blockchain Academy. We have a very distinguished guest, a good friend, and I can say a guru in blockchain. Mamadou Kwidjim Toure is the founder and chief executive officer of Ubuntu Group. We can see Mamadou in many seminars, many forums. Last, as far as I know, if he didn't enter in another place, he was in Davos very successfully and made a lot of, I would say, noise with his approach. He is bringing also the person who brings quantum into Africa. I mean, as you see from the screen, he is the very handsome person. But today, he is not going to talk about the fashion. He will share his experiences and knowledge on tokenization of natural resources for shared prosperity. So, Mamadou, my dear friend, Mr. I will say president, because he is also at the same time president or chief of his group in his country. So I am giving you the floor, and we are looking forward to listen what you are going to share with us today. Floor is yours.
First of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. Really appreciate it, Erol, and also congratulations for all the great work you've been doing. In the blockchain space, in the tech space in general, but also really moving the agenda and shaking the tree for human progress. So really appreciate it. So without further ado, I'll introduce myself. Mamadou Kwidjim Toure. I'm a founder and CEO of Ubuntu Group. Just sharing by way of background, I'm an investment banker by background. So I was actually started my career first with KPMG in Paris and then BNP Paribas, where I did mostly mergers and acquisitions, government advisory, project finance, focused on emerging markets in particular to the African continent before joining IFC, World Bank Group. IFC is a private sector arm of the World Bank Group, where I was in charge of investment in telecom, media, technologies for sub-Saharan Africa. During my career, I invested in different type of technologies, fintech, health tech, of course, telecommunications, etc. And one of my investment, out of the investments that I made, three actually became unicorn, and one got listed on the New York Stock Exchange. I also had the chance to make the first investment in the world in mobile payments, mobile money. It was even before M-Pesa, and was involved with M-Pesa in the early days. So before joining GE, where I was managing director in charge of investment and product finance for sub-Saharan Africa, covering all the subsidiaries under sector of the group: power, water, mining, oil and gas, transportation, healthcare. The journey about tokenizing natural resources. So it started after I left GE, actually, where I realized that you can deploy as much capital as you want in Africa and in emerging markets in particular. But if this capital is in hard currency and those countries suffer from currency depreciation, then it affects significantly the investments that you make on one side, but also, of course, those currency depreciation have a significant impact on people purchasing power, which is quite contradictory if you think of a continent like Africa, for instance, and you can say similar things about Latin America or some Southeast Asian countries. Africa has 40% of the global gold deposit, and most of the currencies have been significantly devaluated And I know Turkey also had some issues with currency, and actually took the right stand to also accumulate more gold in order to create a stronger balance of their currency. So, but it wasn't the case for all countries. So if you take gold, over the past literally 25 years, it has gained roughly 650%, if not more, right? Over the past 5 years alone to the dollar, it has gained 120%. So the reality was, okay, how do you address this mismatch of, let's say, resource-rich nation, but GDP poor nation, right? With purchasing power that gets eroded over time. Since technology was my background, I dabbled very early, early in relative terms, with Bitcoin and blockchain technology. So the idea was to think of a different approach where we could effectively democratize access to wealth by tokenizing those resources. Let me give you an example, right? So Africa has a GDP close to $4 trillion. Global GDP is circa 90 to 100 trillion. But the natural resources of the continent exceeds $100 trillion. So actually 120 plus trillion dollars. So the whole idea for me was, wait a minute, since now we have all those technologies where you can effectively tokenize real world assets, right? Why don't we tokenize gold and fractionalize ownership so that people can get access from the comfort of their mobile phone, gold from as low as 10 cents, which is equivalent roughly to 1 milligram of gold. And the gold would be stored in secure regulated vaults around the world with the possibility for them to redeem it. Now, why does it make a big difference, right? So if you take the context of tokenized gold, in a country like Nigeria, for instance, Nigeria lost probably 400% over 5 years to the dollar, but it lost 637% to gold. South Africa, same thing, around 180% to gold. So imagine you would be, and even if you were, let's say in Europe, right? If you had, euros at the time, if you had €1, basically, if you bought gold at that time, you would have 5 years later equivalent to €2. You would have doubled your wealth if you kept it in gold. Now, point is, how do we democratize access to this wealth? And that's where blockchain becomes a very powerful tool, in the sense that it allows this fractionalized ownership, but it also allows the verification and the certification that that particular asset belongs to you. I'm not going to explain blockchain here. We have Erol as a global expert, right? So now where it becomes also very interesting is for corporates. For global trade, what is very interesting is that since Basel III, gold is considered equivalent to cash almost, which is why central banks have hoarded a lot of gold. Now, what about the masses? What about those SMEs whose cost, in an economy like Turkey, import costs would skyrocket for reasons that they're not responsible for, which is the depreciation of their currency? Why don't we make it easy for them to effectively assess the tokenization of gold in particular, but it could be also lithium, right? It could be any type of minerals. I just want to check if my my team is here. I gave them the link so that they could have the presentation on Ilian, are you on the call? Can we give access for him to present, or I should do it myself on the?
You have the.
Okay. So I'll do it myself from here then. So basically, where it becomes interesting is the following: is that now you have an opportunity for retail and SME to effectively be able to tokenize those assets. Now, of course, when you talk about tokenization of natural resources, it doesn't just involve gold. It involves various type of mineral assets, and it could also involve oil and gas. In particular, where it becomes very interesting, we were dealing with one project, for instance, where you had a lot of gas flaring around the oil exploitation, and which had a huge impact on environment. Now, we've been able to work with one company to effectively put the right technology to collect the gas and to collect the carbon credits. And the funding for that project is actually being considered and deployed through tokenization, so that the population can effectively participate to these economies. So on that particular level, tokenization of natural resources is a major shift in terms of redefining wealth and in terms of accessing wealth. If you look, for instance, we've looked at the retail side and the corporate side. Now, let's look at I would say the government side. And basically, I was talking about countries' GDP, right? Now, the one thing about countries' GDP is you probably have seen many countries won't be receiving USAID aid anymore, for instance, right? So which has its consequences, but at least one that is interesting is that it will force nations to find alternative ways of mobilizing capital, right? So it's important to understand this thing when it comes to finance, right? Finance is based on one, collateral, and two, asymmetry of information. So when we talk about collateral, and since the beginning of capitalism, the point is, if I'm going to lend you money, historically, I would need some form of guarantee. Do you have a house? Do you have land? Do you might have a car or jewelry or something you can give me in case you can't repay? That's the collateral side. The other key element in finance is the asymmetry of information. So asymmetry of information is what effectively determines my level of knowledge, understanding, and assessment of risk that allow me then to price my expected return. So in environment that an investor wouldn't know, it would consider it high risk because it doesn't have all information to make an informed decision. And therefore, it would price it at a very high interest rate. So for instance, the interest rates in Turkey are much, much higher than in Europe due to macroeconomic conditions. And if somebody out of Europe or Asia or America invests in Turkey versus Europe, they would expect a higher return and higher interest rate because of the risk perception. And generally, it's linked to data. So how does blockchain help address this? And how does tokenization of natural resources enable the capacity to address one, the question of collateral, and two, the question of asymmetry of information? Let's start with asymmetry of information. So ultimately, when you look, blockchain allows transparency, traceability, and verification instantly of ownership of a particular asset or of a history of a particular asset. But it also could be applicable to data, right? Now, if we bring blockchain, we address the amount of uncertainty to a certain level because we have significant layers that allow to mitigate the risk perception. But by tokenizing an asset, and that's where it starts changing the game, especially when it's real world asset, which is really a digital representation of a physical asset, you can now, and when it's fractionalized, think of a solo entrepreneur, think of a mom and pop shop, think of SMEs, and even big corporations. They can effectively give, whether it's a lithium-backed token, gold-backed token, silver-backed token, real estate-backed token, as a collateral, and it's immediate, right? And then get loan to value without having to effectively know how credit-worthy you are. And it changes everything in that case, especially for emerging nations who would have, and Turkey also has a lot of minerals actually, right? And where it becomes very interesting, instead of going the traditional route with a sovereign guarantee to mobilize sovereign debt, you could effectively tokenize your resources in ground. And as the way you do that, ultimately, you have technology available, right? So today with satellite electromagnetic resonance and other tools, we can effectively measure how much asset, whether it's water, gas, oil, and other minerals, 5,000 meter deep, right? With the extreme precision without having to spend hundreds of millions of dollars drilling. But why does it make a difference for a nation or for a mining operator? Or is that ultimately the country can then do an assessment of what's in ground, and then of course apply a discount, right? And the discount, let's say you even apply 80% because you know the traditional route of banking are very conservative and work with a certain association of geologists, etc. And of course, then you will apply a discount because it may not be recognized as yet, but it's going to be certainly recognized soon. But because you use tokenization, you diversify your source of capital. Why? Because let's say tomorrow there is a big lithium mine not far from Ankara, right? That could transform the electric car industry because you have it in enough quantity, right? So what would happen is ultimately the Turkish population, starting with them, would have a piece of the resources they're sitting on because they would participate to the security token offering for either the company owning the concession or NFT of the concession itself that is fractionalized, and 80 to I think maybe 90 million people in Turkey now. Let's say each of them can spend $1,000, right, to subscribe. That's $90 billion straight away as an investment that would go, and you still have, of course, ownership and shared ownership, right? But it gives enough capital now for Turkey, for instance, where the government, if it's a JV with the private sector or if it's a private sector, would remain in control and share, of course, the benefit with the population and have enough capital to now fund the hundreds of millions of dollars that are needed to reach to bankability, feasibility, bankability study level, so that you now, and without having to be over diluted. And guess what? Most of the time, the actual drilling proves this technology right. And once the drilling shows the actual reserves and the probable estimated and inferred reserves, now the token that you have will significantly expand in value, 5x, 10x. Now imagine each Turk in the population now would have multiplied their wealth by 5, at least, now that the reserves are proven. And you can now, of course, because it's tradable, and those who have multiplied their wealth by 5 now also have an asset that they can use as a collateral if they want to fund their small business, because you have financial institutions that would be willing to lend you capital on the back of this token because it's all automated. I'll stop here. I'll see if I can bring the slides forward, because it would help significantly, and I didn't want to interrupt here.
Sure.
Give me 2 seconds.
By the way, you're mute. You are mute now.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
You hear me now? Or it
Yeah.
goes back? Okay. Let me bring the deck forward so that we can So basically, when you talk about tokenizing resources, you create a paradigm shift, by unlocking unrealized wealth. Now, why is it interesting and why is it important? If you look at BRICS today, what is interesting is that they're launching the BRICS digital currency, right? And that digital currency actually is 20% backed by gold, a percentage backed by oil and gas and other commodities. In that sense, it changes the game. And if you see the size of BRICS today, and when you know that the future of finance is around tokenization and digital currency, if you also know that 2 years ago, you had 90 central banks that were working on the central bank digital currency. Today, you have 150 of them. And basically, that the train has left the station, right? So even if when you hear Larry Fink from BlackRock mentioning that the future of finance is tokenization, that's the tokenization of assets. And they started with the low-hanging fruit, which is ETF of Bitcoin. But it's literally to just prepare the population to what's coming. And by having this first mover advantage, a country like Turkey and a few African countries that we've actually signed with a few sovereign wealth funds, we're also talking to Chile at the moment and a few other countries, right? Where you can have that anticipated move and prepare for the next financial system. Mm-hmm. So let me, I think Ilian is on the call. So basically, what is critical also, I know we don't have much time, but I wanted at least to show a few key slides to give you a perspective of what is at stake, right? And what we've done as Ubuntu at this point, we have our wallet on App Store and Google Play. We've launched our gold-backed token. And what we realized is that in terms of demand, we're seeing more SMEs and institutions and corporates who are actually showing great interest for them to be able to manage their treasury. As you know, when those economic actors are dealing with importing hard currency, revenue in local currency, in order for their shareholders to preserve decent dividends, or for international lenders to effectively mitigate the risk, that they're very interested in converting locally the local currency into gold-backed tokens so that they can hedge against inflation. What is very interesting also is if you look at a new model that we've seen. For instance, we've signed with the Ashanti Kingdom in Ghana, right? And what was interesting with the Ashanti Kingdom is they were looking at building a smart city. So the Ashanti Kingdom is probably one of the most ancient kingdom, not just in Africa, but around the world, several thousands of years. And the land runs from Ghana, Burkina, and Côte d'Ivoire. And they wanted to be the very advanced smart city. And in their fundraising process, they were confronted with the plethora of smart city out there when they would go to London, New York, and everywhere else. And our conversation was, if you measure actually the value of your underground resources, why don't you tokenize it and also use it as a collateral potentially for tokenized bond? And guess what? The Ashanti Kingdom underground resources, in-ground resources, is estimated close to $1 trillion, while the smart city costs 12 billion, right? So with that, then you create a paradigm shift where you make your in-ground wealth work for you. Mm-hmm. I'll pause here. Maybe I'll take questions since there's 15 minutes left, and I'll use the slides. If I can dial back in so that I can bring the slides in.
Continue, because there is no question. I mean, I'm just...
Oh, there's no question. Oh. Okay.
Everybody to listen to you.
Okay, I thought there was a 15-minute question. So
yeah, let me load. Nobody.
Okay, let me load.
They prefer to listen to you.
Let me load the document. Okay. If at least we could get that. Would you okay to allow me to step in, step out, and step back in so that I can?
Sure.
Okay, give me 2 seconds. 2 seconds, thank you. Okay, great. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, together we rise. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. So we had a whole presentation prepared. So, but we'll send the snippets in any case. I think I wanted at least to take you to a few interesting slides, right? So this one, for instance, I don't know if you can see. If you look at the major suppliers of select critical minerals to the United States, you'll see that Africa plays a major role, right? Now, I talked about, our different, so the point of Larry Fink, when I said, is the next generation for markets, and, and he's sure the future will be tokenized. I wanted to also take you to, this is a very interesting part, right? Why do we believe that tokenization of real world asset is the silver bullet for financial inclusion, right? If you look Africa or Latin America, you're talking the current distribution and traditional financial markets, the addressable audience, people having access to those capital markets, meaning stock exchange, bonds, etc., is 1 to 5%. Yeah. In globally, it's 10 to 15%. So that's 1.2 billion people. In OECD countries, it's 40 to 50%. And most of the time, they use a broker and so on, right? Now, guess what? Because people have most of the time more access to mobile phones, you can directly reach them, right? And now it will give you access to 70% of the global population who could now participate to these new financial markets thanks to blockchain technology. Of course, we do ethically source, etc. But here is also another interesting analysis, right? And we have this, our gold-backed coin is called GIFT. Now, it could be backed by gold, it could be backed by lithium, it could be backed by any other minerals. When you compare with fiat, with Bitcoin or altcoin, RWA, backed by key commodities / precious metals like gold, like silver, present a much better advantage. Why? Because those assets are needed and traded globally. Now, what is also interesting to look at here is here, for instance. So we're entering a commodity boom super cycle. So this is the time, the next few years, where if we capture, right, we're now going back up the trend now since 2020. And now, if you look on the right, the critical minerals needed by China, EU, and the United States, I'll put at I'll make it bigger. Aluminum, so they're all, you have this, so there are, exactly. And that's why entering into tokenization of natural resources, especially for emerging markets who have in abundance, and also in the context of South-South cooperation, but also East-West cooperation, right? There's a major role to play if we securitize. And people will say, oh yeah, there's a political risk, there's instability. Look, I mean, I'm a former World Bank. We know how to mitigate those risks, right? You have political risk insurance, you can work with MIGA, or you can also work with Lloyd's, Zurich Re, Allianz Re, in packaging that so that the bonds get insured or the securities get insured, and now you have a tradable product. And why it becomes very interesting is that it creates a level playing field, right? Maybe corporates and pension funds and investors don't have the capacity to go, in those markets and secure concessions. But if from the comfort of their desk, they could build their own portfolio of tokens backed by those mineral resources, then it's a game changer. If we go here, which is, so I told you, for instance, we have the case of Karamoja in Uganda that has huge resources and that could effectively have massive impact for the country. But when I said earlier, the train has left the station, Citibank is using smart contracts to save some purpose as bank guarantees and letters of credit, working with shipping company, AP Moller and Merckx, right? HSBC has its own gold token. JP Morgan launched a project Guardian, enable wealth managers to purchase then rebalance positions in tokenized assets across multiple interconnected blockchains, forged from Societe Generale. So there is, and I mentioned earlier, the central banks and so on. What is also very interesting, we looked at the evolution of the top 10 minerals historically and forward from 2018 to 2028. Guess what? They're all growing and they've been growing. So lithium in blue. Below, you have graphene, who's going to rise massively. And underneath, you have, on the top, you have uranium, and then below, you have graphene, and then you have lithium, right? And then you have neodymium in terms of growth. And we're talking about 100, 300%, 400%, 800% upcoming over the next decade. So the time is now. Now, if you look at a more detailed analysis, right, now you see how lithium did from 2018 to 2023, same for cobalt, etc. So we're talking about, compounded annual growth rate, historically, that could go around, for lithium, for instance, you're talking about 117% growth over the next 5 years. And this is very conservative, right? For cobalt, 20%, palladium, etc. So if you look also, gold in particular, we believe with the global macroeconomic and social political context is going to have massive repercussion and expected strong growth in gold. And that's why central banks who know better are now all holding gold. But what prevents you from buying from 10 cents? Why should it be only the central banks, right? And this is really the democratizing access to wealth that we're bringing to the market, right? And you can see copper, nickel, uranium, graphene. Graphene, for instance, is expected a growth of 150%. And those are conservative growth, conservative numbers. Now, we mentioned a friend from BlackRock.
Yeah.
I'm not yeah, I'm not going to go in detail in explaining how tokenization works because I believe we're dealing with a very well-informed audience. But when we say the train has left the station, it's real, right? So on the right, you will see, for instance, right, the market cap of the top 10 largest stable coins. It's actually, it doesn't even reach $1 trillion, right? Gold market, commodities markets are multi-trillion dollars. And if we really want to bring liquidity to market, plus reliance of the underlying commodity that is effectively linked to the economic performance, that's where you want to play. And here, for instance, when you look at the global real estate, the actual stock markets and the derivative markets and the gold market, right? When you look at the commodities market, it's not mentioned here. It's because it's actually extremely big, right? And that's really where the opportunity lies. And when you look at the inflows into the tokenized commodities, it's largely increasing, right? And this was before this new era that we're getting into, because I believe now that the United States is bullish on digital assets and digital currency, digital economy, I believe we're going to see an incredible amount of growth in that industry. Since also SEC is now much more flexible with those questions, it will open up, since also the President Trump wanted to make the US global center for AI and cryptocurrency. We may want to play on the fact that since the floodgates are now open, let's just find the right asset to back this technology whose future is now largely promising.
Yeah.
So tokenization can be applied, of course, to real estate and so on, agriculture. I'm not going to dwell too much into this, but here is an interesting analysis: worldwide central banks quarterly gold purchase. Mm-hmm. Look at the peak, and of course, it interestingly enough corresponds to the time where with COVID, where I think a quarter of the dollars in circulation were printed during that time or after that time. So I believe there's been a reaction to risk of inflation where global capital markets have been looking at gold as an edge. But where it's interesting also, why I don't believe gold is a threat to the dollar. It's very simple. In most countries, especially when you look, whether it's Africa, Latin America, most central banks are highly constrained with dollars, right? And you have often bottlenecks to honor trades and so on, and it really frustrates growth and economic trade and commercial ties. But if you have alternatives that are not other currencies, but that are actually commodities like gold-backed tokens, then it becomes a very interesting play that does not put pressure on the local currency or does not bring other foreign currency, but plays to the strength of the nation, right? So here, those are like compared to other currencies. So we have this say in Africa, right? And in countries where, let's take the case of DeepSeek for a second. Invention is mother of necessity, right? They didn't have access to the latest chip. They were resource constrained in energy. They had to think out of the box at a fraction of the cost, half the cost, 40% less energy to come with that solution. Actually, and that's a way of leapfrogging. Africa did the same by leapfrogging the banking system 20 years ago with M-Pesa. Why? There were not enough banks and banking infrastructure around. but people had access to mobile phone. So instead of having a bank building, they made everything digital. And now M-Pesa moves 40% of Kenya's GDP. So Africa leapfrogged fixed line through mobile telecommunication. Africa disrupted banking through mobile money. So I see today people telling me about, oh yeah, I got Apple Pay and I can do this and that. And I'm like, we've been doing that for decades, brother. You know, so the reality is we believe that because there's less legacy structures and systems and regulations to face, it's an opportunity for many emerging markets to leapfrog by embarking into tokenizing real-world assets. Mm-hmm. So you were mentioning quantum computing. This is also something we do, but I'll come back to that. It's an interesting thing when we talk about leapfrog. If you have leapfrog, if you have blockchain, AI, and quantum, then you have a small recipe for a game-changing situation. I'll pause here because I know we're going to be on time. But
I will tell you, you are explaining and sharing your knowledge with us. We even didn't feel how the time really flowed. I mean, I can say to you, you are not only a good person, as far as I know, you are also a very good speaker. So
thank you.
we are very thankful today at Leiden University Blockchain Talks under the title Tokenization of Natural Resources for Shared Prosperity. We had the very important guest, Mamadou Kwidjim Toure. He really enlightened us how tokenization of natural resources for shared prosperity, mostly on the base of the government. And we are really very happy to have him today. And I think before I close, I would like to have a promise from Mamadou that he will join again with the other subjects that he could not even had time to explain to us.
With the greatest pleasure. Really, I enjoyed this opportunity, and it's always an honor and a pleasure to work with you as we share so very similar idea about how technology can change the world.
Thank you. Mamadou, I'm very thankful.
Thank you so much.
For your really very precious time. I know how busy you are, but we are really very happy. And
no, I'm grateful. I'm grateful, and thank you. And I'm
really also at our university in person, that we will share more things with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.